I cannot tell you the level of cognitive dissonance that I have experienced in putting quotes together that I'm not sure I myself would pay. And so with all of these forces at play, I'm gonna make a very morbid but honest prediction as to where tune-up prices are going in the next 5 years. And many of you are not gonna like this prediction, but buckle up because I see the price of tune-ups. I've got some honest thoughts to share with you guys today when it comes to service prices in bike shops and what exactly has been going on these last couple of years. A lot of people will use the buzzword of inflation, but that is not the truth. There are many other pressures outside of just inflation that are causing your bike tune-ups to become so darn expensive. If you take the last 5 years into account, for example, inflation may account for maybe a 15 to 25% overall increase in prices over that period. As you can see, our base level tune-up starts at 119, and to be perfectly honest, we continually have conversations with our team on whether it's going to be necessary to increase that yet again. So why exactly is it costing you an arm and a leg to get tune-up services on your bike? There's a combination of pressures, but I'll start with what I perceive is the greatest one. And that is that bicycle mechanics are a dying breed, and it's very, very difficult to come across a good mechanic that you can get into your store. Even if you can find a good mechanic, there is a massive discrepancy between the level of skill they have to bring to the table and the maximum income they could pull in using that skill. I always like to joke that if somebody was starting from scratch, they could, in a year's time, become a good enough coder to go make 6 figures somewhere creating software. Whereas if somebody started from scratch as a bicycle mechanic, there is zero chance that within that same year's time, they could get themselves to a skill level where they could independently operate the service department of a busy store. You may think to yourself, well, if the mechanic's making 20 or 25 an hour and they're doing these tune-ups at 120, isn't that an obvious spread where the shop's gonna get enough margin? In theory, you would be correct if that mechanic were busy every hour of every day. The reality in most shops is that there's gonna be idle time in between, there's gonna be stepping out onto the floor to help customers, there's gonna be answering the phone, answering emails, and plenty of coaching moments. Training is never complete for any of your employees, and that takes up time. Not to mention workers' compensation, payroll taxes, and having the systems in place to hire employees in the first place. Now, although this is a factor that plays into bike shops charging what they charge for their tune-ups, it's not the only factor. We've really been talking about the supply side of the equation, which is how much of that skilled labor can we bring in order to meet the demand. Now let's talk about the demand side of the equation, which is equally out of control. Traditionally, the lion's share of proceeds that have been earned by your local bike shop have come from the sales side of the equation. And while margins get squeezed and sales continue to get cannibalized by online retailers, and all the competition that exists in the market today, shops are increasingly having to rely on the service side of their business to keep the flow of revenue steady. A little bit of this has been by choice, but a lot of it has been by necessity. Think about what happens when more and more bike sales are occurring online rather than in your physical store. Overall, if you look at the bike industry in terms of how many bikes sold per year, it is growing, but a larger and larger chunk of those sales are not occurring at bike shops. And so you have this equation where there's more and more bikes on the road that are going to need servicing, and that servicing is not going to be facilitated by the online retailer that sold that bicycle. This means shops are selling less bikes, and yet their demand for service is going through the roof. It's not that easy to swap out salespeople for mechanics, so you have an issue on the supply side where you can't get the skilled labor in, and then you have the issue on the demand side where there's more and more of these bikes that need service, and on top of that, more of these bikes that are being sold need service more frequently, due to lack of quality componentry. Any mechanic that's worked on the bikes of today versus the bikes of the 90s knows that there's a huge difference in how robust these machines are. It's the same as with cars. Things are getting more complicated, more finicky, and less robust. So the demand on bike mechanics is not going up only by volume, but also by skill level as we engineer more and more bells and whistles into bicycles. The only way to compensate for this demand is going to be more skilled labor. And I'm telling you that in today's environment, that skilled labor simply is not meeting that demand. Now, on top of all these other factors, now let's throw in that the bicycle industry is heavily seasonal. Here in the Mid-Atlantic region, we do close to 80% of our business for the year inside of a 4-month window. So while we're twiddling our thumbs in January, once May rolls around, there is no way we're getting your bike turned around within 1 week, let alone some shops 1 month. On Saturdays in May, we are constantly juggling 6 or 7 conversations simultaneously from the minute we open to the minute we close. Shop owners will then spend 3, 4, 5, 6 hours in the shop after the fact, calling back missed phone calls, answering missed emails, and especially getting those bikes in the stand that have been coming in droves for their tune-ups. For us, we've used a very simple equation every year when it comes to assessing our prices. That is our most effective lever for dealing with the demand, with the other side being how can we increase our supply. We can either decrease the demand through price, or we can increase our ability to supply through hiring skilled labor. But hiring that skilled labor comes with the difficulty of getting somebody whose skill level is here, but we can't quite pay them here, and we could have trouble retaining them because of the seasonality of the industry we're talking about. This is why in most shops that you walk into, there are multiple salespeople, but only 1 or 2 mechanics. Bike shops get so busy, in fact, that the sales associates more than pay their own salary just in the time that they save the mechanics in conversing with customers. It's more so about keeping the mechanic on their mechanic stand, which is where the dollars are being generated. Every minute that they're pulled away from that, you're introducing forces that drive these prices up. And the truth is, shop owners don't really want to drive these prices up, and by and large, you see shops actually undercharging given their current levels of demand. And this does not eliminate the fact that you are between a rock and a hard place here, because when you don't effectively curb that demand through price, then your customers still end up paying for it in the form of extremely long lag times. We have local shops in our area that get out to 2 or 3 month turnaround to get a tune-up. And you can imagine your customers' frustration when they have to wait through half of the spring season to get their first ride in. So what's the solution to this? In my eyes, the only solution is more bike shops. However, the trend has been going in the opposite direction. And so with all of these forces at play, I'm gonna make a very morbid but honest prediction as to where tune-up prices are going in the next 5 years. And many of you are not gonna like this prediction, but buckle up because I see the price of tune-ups doubling in the next 5-year period. That is, unless industry trends sway in a different direction, where shops are able to regain a lot of their revenue through sales, or that somehow the economics of in-person retail gain their strength back to the point where we have a net increase in the number of bike shops. But right now, the trend is very strongly that even though we have more and more bikes hitting the streets, more and more shops are shuttering their doors, leaving the ones that are still open to deal with the overwhelming demand. In switching to a service-centric model that's less focused on the retail side, shops are going to be forced to increase their prices on labor. For better or worse, this is where we're at. A lot of the blame is put on the bike shops themselves, but it really is a rock and hard place situation. I cannot tell you the the level of cognitive dissonance that I have experienced in putting quotes together that I'm not sure I myself would pay if we were looking into the situation of maybe I was hiring a plumber to come check something out at my house. Maybe it's just me, but at a certain price point, I will go through the trouble of jumping onto YouTube if it's something I think I could perceptively tackle. But then yet again, you get into a strong argument for why shops charge what they do, because to the untrained person, that could take up your entire weekend muddling around on YouTube to figure out how to tune your rear derailleur just to not get it quite right. Which is the same reason I will fork over $400 or $500 to a plumber that comes over and fixes something in 20 minutes time. I wasn't paying the plumber for their time, I was paying for the time they saved me. And with bikes becoming increasingly complicated machines, you have to look at these prices and realize that even though it takes me 30 or 40 minutes to perform one of these tune-ups, the person on the other side of that equation is likely being saved an entire weekend of muddling around on YouTube. For better or worse, these are my honest thoughts. I feel it's a really important thing to address. In the crazy macroeconomic world that we live in, bike shop labor is one of those things that is increasing far faster than the rate of inflation. And I hope that this illustrated some of the reasons as to why.